Hey everyone, this is just a quick tutorial on registering folks to vote, how to help people work through the voter registration card, and also some information that you might encounter, questions you might encounter as you are engaged in student voter registration at UMaine. So a couple things to note first off. In order to vote, you need to be a citizen of the United States. If someone is a non-citizen, if they have a green card, a student visa, that's insufficient. They actually have to be citizens of the United States. They also have to be an established resident in the town where they're intending to register to vote. That means a physical address. So if someone has a P.O. box and no physical address in that town, that's insufficient. But as we'll talk about in just a moment, students who are going to school within a town, they are eligible to vote, eligible to register, and eligible to vote in the town where they're going to school. And then lastly, you have to be 18 years of age. Right? So you can't be turned away trying to vote if you meet those three requirements. A couple of things that you might encounter as you're registering people to vote in terms of questions that people might ask. Um, One is concerns about financial aid. So registering to vote and where you register to vote has no impact whatsoever on your federal financial aid. So if someone has heard that this might have an impact on a scholarship or some sort of financial aid package that they have, that's simply not the case, right? There's no connection between where you register to vote and your financial aid. Status as a dependent on your parents' taxes has nothing to do with where you register to vote, right? So your parents can still claim you as a dependent if you're registered to vote in the town where you're going to school. It is not a declaration of financial independence. It does not make you, no longer eligible to be claimed as a dependent. It's simply the municipality in which you're going to be exercising your political voice. And then lastly, tuition status. So there's no impact on tuition status. It doesn't necessarily change whether you're classified as an in-state or out-of-state student. So those are the three kind of biggies. You might also hear people concerned about potential impacts in terms of where they register their vehicle. Students who are registering to vote, they don't need to prove that they're complying with motor vehicle law in order to vote or in order to register. Right, so there's no expectation that when you register to vote that you rush off and register your car in a different state, anything like that. So some of the major concerns that you might encounter from students who would be reluctant to register to vote locally and to vote in the town where they're going to school, you can kind of dismiss right off the bat. All of this information is from Campus Elect. It's from Vote 411, which is a nonpartisan project of the League of Women Voters. So all of those issues, if you encounter those questions, you can just hand someone this flyer and dispense with them. A couple things to note. First-time voters in Maine, if you're registering to vote for the first time, whether you're registering from out of state or this is the first election in which you've registered to vote, you need to show a valid Maine driver's license or a Maine state ID. Now, students won't have to do that at the time they register, but when they actually go to the polls in Orono, they'll have to show that driver's license or Maine state ID. If someone doesn't have a Maine ID, then when they fill out the registration card, they can provide the last four digits of their social security number. But if they have a Maine driver's license or a Maine state ID, when they fill out the voter registration card, they're going to have to provide that number. And then the state of Maine, would verify that person's identity against either the Maine Bureau of Motor Vehicles registry, the database that they have, or they'd use the Social Security database if someone provides a Social Security number. If when someone is showing up to vote in person, they should bring with them a photo ID, right? And they should bring with them a copy of something that's proof of residence. That can be a utility bill, that can be a bank statement, that can just be a piece of mail that's been sent to them at their physical address. We can also use at the University of Maine, and this is approved by the Secretary of State's office, we can use Main Street. So if somebody shows up without any anything to confirm their physical address. We can look it up on Main Street and then confirm it through Main Street. So some of those concerns relate to, after someone registers and when they actually show up at the polls on election day. But that's just some good information to have in mind. And we have lots of copies of this flyer that you can distribute to people who would potentially have questions like this. You can refer them to this handout. All right, so the actual voter registration card itself looks like this. It will be green, right? And it will be two-sided. It won't be one gigantic rectangle. But these are the two sides, okay? And it's important when people are filling out this card, one of the things I'll often say to them as I set it down in front of them and hand them a pen is, this is a legal document. Just to make it clear to them that this is something serious. They need to take their time. They need to write legibly. And the biggest issue we encounter is if people fill this out incorrectly or they fill it out in a way that it's incomprehensible, this delays or prevents their registration and can cause complications later on. Now, Maine luckily has same-day registration, so if someone had filled this out incorrectly and we couldn't decipher it, and then the town couldn't decipher it, it would not mean that they would be prevented from voting, but it just might kind of slow them down on election day. So one of the things that sometimes individuals miss as they fill out these cards is the information here at the top. You need to fill out this information at the top or they can't process the card. So you need to verify that you're a citizen, and you need to verify that you'll be 18 on or before election day. You also need to choose a party affiliation, or you need to choose unenrolled. Okay, and you have some choices there. Unenrolled is effectively, in the state of Maine, registering as independent. But the implication of this would be that you can't participate in party primaries. So there is an impact to this. You'd fill out last name, first name, middle name, date of birth. Pretty straightforward. Now, it's sometimes confusing for students filling out their address. This should be their local physical address. So if they live on campus, it should be the address that they use to get mail sent to them at the University of Maine. This is usually the address that is listed on Main Street as well. So if a student doesn't know what that address is or doesn't know how it's formatted, then they can fill this out. City and town, okay. Current mailing address, a lot of students want to fill this out. They want to put their address of their parents back, wherever they're from. I generally just say, if you receive mail at this residence, this physical address, this has to be a physical address, not a P.O. box, then just leave this blank. It will just confuse matters if you add information in here. Chances are, if this is your physical address, that is also the most immediate location in which you would receive mail. Zip code would be local zip code, and telephone is optional, but I tell students, if you're comfortable filling this out, please fill that out, so that if there's any issue processing your registration, we can get back to you. Now here, it's going to ask you if you've previously been registered to vote, and it's going to ask you where. Okay, so if someone has registered to vote previously, they've registered in their hometown or in another state, they have to provide that information there. Okay, that is the front side of the card. Unfortunately, sometimes folks are in a rush, they fill out the front side of the card, they pass it off, they run off to class. That registration is not complete. There's information on the back side of the card that they need to fill out. So you want to make sure that people fill out both sides of the card, and they do so in a way that's legible. On the back, this line here would only be filled out if someone had legally changed their name. So if they had a prior name, they got married, they decided to change their name, whatever reason, this is the only time that you would fill that out. Okay, so for the vast majority of people, particularly the vast majority of students that you're registering, this is not going to apply. You have to sign and date this card. If they don't sign and date this card, their registration can't be processed. Okay, and then lastly, voter ID. So as I said before, when we were going through that handout, if the person registering to vote is a new Maine voter, they've never registered to vote in Maine before, then they have to provide one of two things. They either provide the number that's on their license plate or their state ID, right? That's one option. And if they have that, they have to provide it. If they're issued a Maine driver's license or a Maine state ID, that is what goes in this box. If they don't have that, if they're from out of state and they have an out of state ID and they haven't switched over to a Maine license, then they can provide the last four of their social security number. And only if they don't have either of those things would they write none. And that would be very rare. Pretty much everybody would have one of those things. That is it. At the point in which somebody fills out those numbers and does so in the correct way, their registration on their end is complete. This information here would be filled out by the registrar. Okay, so they don't need to worry about handling any of this. At the University of Maine, we collect these cards, we drop them off at the town office. The town office processes them and would be in touch with the person registering if there was any issue in processing their registration. When they show up to vote on election day, if they are a new Maine voter, they're not in the voter rolls already, they should bring with them a photo ID and they should bring with them some sort of proof of residence. And like I said, if they're a UMaine student, verifying their address in Main Street would be sufficient, but it's always good to have a backup. So they could bring a piece of mail, they could bring a bill, even like the address label from an Amazon box that had been shipped to them. So that's pretty much it, right? And your role and responsibility will be answering any questions, walking people through this registration process, and giving the card a quick check when that person is still there, right? Don't let them run away after they fill it out. But when they're still there, just give it a quick check to make sure that they filled it out, it's legible, there's no missing information, and they haven't accidentally, filled out a section of the card that they shouldn't have, or filled in incorrect information. There'll be experienced volunteers here to help you. So if at any point you have any questions, if you get an oddball question that you're not sure how to answer, just turn to the person next to you and see if they can help this person out. And for anything that's really complicated or really challenging, we can just refer folks to the town office or the Secretary of State's office, and we'll have their information at the table as well. So this is a lot of fun. Once you figure out how to do this, it's not intimidating at all. It feels really good to help your fellow citizens register to vote and exercise their political voice. And thank you so much for agreeing to volunteer and agreeing to be involved in our efforts here on campus.